A long time ago, idol worshipping was the only religion in Amisi. Christianity was highly unwelcome. On two occasions, Christianity has tried to make its way into the community, but it was unsuccessful. The people of Amisi did not like or welcome the thought that a foreign god was going to compete or take over Amadioha, the god of their forefathers. So they refused and rejected the religion. The preacher who had traveled from the city to start up the church was attacked. He miraculously escaped, but the church building was burnt down. The second preacher, who came a year later, was not so lucky. He lost his life in the process. That was a very sad day for Chioma. Chioma was an 18-year-old orphan who had lost both her parents to a strange illness, which, by the way, Amadioha, the so-called deity, could not cure. After her father died and her mother took ill, she had questioned the potency of Amadioha's power. Nne, kedu ife mee na Amadioha akara ọgwụgwọ gị? Kedu ife mee Amadioha ji gbachi nkịtị papa nwụọ? Ka ọ bụ na Amadioha anyị na-efe bụ chi nwụrụ anwụ? She had asked her mother. Nwa m o, amaro m, her mother had replied in tears. After her mom died, she had lost all hope or faith in Amadioha. She had concluded that Amadioha was, after all, chi nwụrụ anwụ. So, when the first preacher had come and spoken about Jesus, about the love of a God who could give his only son to die for her sins, Chioma had been curious to know more about that God. But that opportunity had been taken away when the little hut Preacher John had constructed for fellowship had been burnt down by the youths of Amisi. After Preacher John escaped, Chioma had continued to read the Bible the preacher had given to her. But a lot of what she read made little or no sense to her. She needed help to understand. She had prayed according to how she had been taught, and she had asked God to send her help. A year later, Preacher Peter had come to Amisi to spread the gospel. So I can just open my mouth and pray, ask this God for anything without going to his shrine or offer sacrifice, and this God will just answer and grant my request? She had asked Preacher Peter. Yes, he had answered. You don't need to go to any shrine to see him. He lives in your heart. That answer had brought a smile to Chioma's face and the kind of warmth and peace that she had never experienced before. That was the day Chioma gave her life to Christ and also got baptized in the village stream. Preacher Peter had taught Chioma a good portion of the Bible and answered most of her questions. Chioma and 5 other people in the village who also believed and accepted the gospel of Jesus Christ attended the small fellowship Preacher Peter had started. But unfortunately, that was short-lived too, when the church building was burnt down and Preacher Peter was killed. Chioma had become very angry with God. She couldn't understand why God would let that happen twice. She fled to Isiala, the neighboring village where her mother was from. The other 5 people that attended fellowship with her had reverted to idol worshipping when the villagers threatened to burn down their houses. During the period when Chioma sought refuge, she lived with her aunt, Ego. Isiala was a much bigger village than Amisi. Christianity and idol worshipping were the two religions that existed there, and the villagers had a choice to choose whom they wanted to worship. So, Chioma was free to fellowship with the church her auntie Ego attended. That was where she met Udo, the preacher's wife, as they were normally called in Amisi. It was Sunday, another day for fellowship. Chioma was in church. She could hear the sermon going on. Preacher Ndubisi was as audible as a gun, but Chioma couldn't understand what he was saying. She was deep in thoughts, pondering over the dream she had early that morning. She had forgotten most of the details of the dream, but the part she couldn't forget was where she had the Bible to her face and the stones coming down on her like rain. She had woken up drenched in sweat. She also remembered seeing a male figure standing at a distance, smiling while she was being stoned to death. The figure looked like a foreigner because he wasn't dressed like the villagers. Chioma, Chioma, she heard someone calling her. She lifted her head to discover that fellowship was over. How are you, Nne? Asked Udo, the preacher's wife. I'm fine, ma, Chioma had answered. Udo took a long look at her and said, I know that you are going through a lot, but I also want you to know that you can come talk to me. What is the matter? Udo asked again. I had a terrible dream early this morning, ma, she said. I was being stoned to death in Amisi. There was a man standing by, watching. He didn't even try to save me. He just stood by the wayside and smiled. After she narrated her dream, Udo invited her to come speak with her husband. Preacher Ndubisi told her the story of Stephen, who was stoned to death because of his faith in God. He tried to explain to her that as followers of Christ, it should be counted as joy when you're being persecuted. I think God is calling you to go back to Amisi. He wants to use you to rescue the people. He needs a vessel to do that, and he has chosen you. But why me? I don't understand. I don't know much of the Bible. I'm still trying to find my way. My child, Preacher Ndubisi said, when God calls you, he enables you. Just like Moses, everything you need, God has already deposited in you. After Chioma had that conversation with Preacher Ndubisi, her heart was troubled. Will God allow the people of Amisi stone her to death? She had wondered. If God couldn't protect Preacher Peter, how can he protect her? She pondered over the questions in her mind. The more she thought about it, the more restless she became. After a while, she decided not to bother herself anymore. If God wanted to deliver Amisi, he would send someone else. She continued to attend fellowship with her aunt. Then one night, while she was sleeping, she felt a light, continuous tap on her shoulder. In a sleepy state, she sat up. "Auntie," she said softly, thinking it was Ego who was trying to wake her. She became more awake when she wasn't getting any response. She looked around the room and found Ego lying down, deep asleep. She called out softly to Auntie Ego, but there was no response. She was fast asleep. So who was tapping my shoulder? She wondered. A soft but very audible voice interrupted her thoughts. "Go to Amisi. I will be with you. No harm shall come to you. Chioma, go to Amisi. I will be with you. No harm shall come to you." Then the voice faded off. Chioma became scared. She got up and went to Auntie Ego. "Auntie, Auntie," she called out as she tapped her arm. "Chioma, Ogini," Auntie Ego replied as she sat up. Chioma told her what she had experienced. Auntie Ego said it must have been a dream. Chioma insisted it was not. The next day, she went to see Preacher Ndubisi and his wife, Udo. She told them about the dream. "That was not a dream, Chioma," Ndubisi said. "It was an encounter with Jesus. God has called you to return to Amisi. He will perform wonders through you. Everything you need, Chioma, everything you need is inside of you." The preacher and his wife prayed with Chioma before she went back to her auntie's house. Few days later, she returned to Amisi. It was the Nkuku festival. This was a festival Amisi celebrated twice a year. During this period, no one was allowed to trade, farm, or hunt. Sacrifices were offered to Amadioha 3 times a day for 7 days before the main event. On the day of the festival, the king and the villagers were gathered at the village square. It was forbidden to be absent from the festival. Usually, weeks before the festival, the town criers would go out to announce the date so that everyone would be aware. During the festival, the chief priest would send out some young men with omu, palm leaves in between their lips, to arrest anyone who was not at the village square. If anyone was caught, that person would be severely punished. Chioma had arrived the night before the festival. Her home was very dirty, but she couldn't clean because she was too tired from her journey. When she got up the following morning, she could see things that had been offered to Amadioha all around people's houses. She realized it was the Nkuku festival. She no longer worshipped idols, so she wouldn't be attending the festival. She also knew it was an abomination to be absent from the festival. So she decided she was just going to spend the rest of the day locked inside until the festival was over. Then she would decide her next course of action. A few hours later, Chioma started to hear the sounds of drum and people clapping and singing. All of a sudden, she started to feel a strange aura all around her. She became afraid and had no idea what to do. Then she remembered the voice, "I will be with you. No harm shall come to you." She picked up her Bible and started worshiping and praying. Lost in the atmosphere of her worship, she had no idea there were people banging at her door and calling out her name. Suddenly, the door burst open. A group of angry boys grabbed her and took her away. Chioma continued to sing and pray. She had no idea where all that boldness came from. She suddenly realized she wasn't scared anymore. In no time, the boys brought her to the village square. The villagers started to react. Chioma could hear some of them as they spoke. Some spoke out of pity, others spoke out of spite. The boys took her to the center of the square and shoved her until she fell down. All the time, she strongly held on to her Bible. There was a sudden silence. She turned around to see that the chief priest of Amadioha was standing behind her. She held out her Bible and started to pray. The chief priest lifted his staff and pointed it at her. Nya nwatakịrị dị ka gị chọrọ ịnwa m? Ị chọrọ ịnwa Amadioha? Eh? He thundered. So you have decided to continue a strange religion in Amisi. He took his staff and drew a large circle around Chioma while he made incantations. When he was done, he took 2 steps backward from the circle and continued with his incantations, pointing to the east, west, north, and south. For a split second, Chioma thought she saw fear and worry on the face of the chief priest. She became more audible in her prayer. She lifted her Bible and started to plead the blood of Jesus all around her. The chief priest became restless. He was certainly expecting something to happen during his incantations, but nothing seemed to be happening. The villagers started to mumble among themselves. Chioma became bolder. She knelt down and continued to pray. Then the chief priest shouted, "Take her away! Take her to the shrine. Amadioha will decide what to do with her." The boys, with Omo on their lips, walked into the circle, grabbed her, and took her away. They took her to the shrine and tied her to a tree. 3 of them left the shrine, and the other 2 stayed back to watch her. She started to hear the sounds of drumming again. Much later, the 3 boys returned. They untied her and took her away. They took her to a spot not far from the shrine. The chief priest, elders, and the Igwe were there. She stood few feet away from the Igwe and elders. "Chioma, why have you chosen to desecrate our land? You have decided to continue with this strange religion, and even worse was to disregard Amadioha on a day set aside to worship him," said the Igwe. "Amadioha bụ chi nwụrụ anwụ. Amadioha is a dead god, a god that cannot save his people when they need him. I believe in the only living God who sent his son, Jesus, to die for our sins." "Alo! Alo!" Ezemo shouted. "Throw her into the pit." 3 of the boys grabbed Chioma and threw her into a very deep pit. "Jesus!" she screamed. She landed on her left side. For a while, she thought her shoulder had dislocated. She sat up, moved her shoulder around a bit. She was fine. She wasn't injured. Ezemo stood, looking down at her, and said, "You will remain here until Amadioha decides what to do with you." The news that Chioma was to be sacrificed to Amadioha spread all over the village. People gossiped. Those who knew her and her parents pitied her. Others who didn't care said she got what she deserved. But no one dared come to the pit to offer her food or water. Ezemo had warned that anyone who dared would be sacrificed too, and so no one came to help her. She sat inside the pit for days, under the scorching sun in the day, and at night she battled the sounds and bites of mosquitoes and other insects. Her throat went dry. She cried. She prayed, Lord, where is the protection you promised? Are you also powerless to save those who need you when they are in distress? She cried. You promised no harm will come to me, she cried. Her throat had become very dry from all the crying, shouting, and praying. She hadn't had food or water to drink for days. She was already very weak. In tears, she drifted to sleep. She woke up to the sound of someone calling her. Chioma, Chioma. She opened her eyes and realized it was the break of dawn. Then she saw a little girl, about 8 years old, sitting by her side. She handed Chioma a bowl of water. Chioma grabbed the bowl without asking any questions and drank. It was so refreshing. She took large gulps, some spilling all over her neck and chest. She didn't even mind. She was so thirsty. When the bowl was empty, she handed it back to the girl. She stared at the little girl. Who was she, and how did she get into this pit? The little girl, almost as if she read Chioma's mind, smiled and said, Afam Buchisom. Chioma smiled back and said, Daalu o. She opened her mouth again to question the little girl, but the little girl said, Sleep now. You will need your strength in the morning. A cool breeze blew all over Chioma's face and body, and once again she drifted off to sleep. Chioma! Chioma! A male voice called out to her. She woke up and stared at the voice calling. Climb the ladder, the voice said, a little nicer this time. Chioma stood up. Her knees felt a little weak, but she managed to pick her Bible, placed it under her left armpit, and started to climb. When she got to the top, two boys grabbed her arms and pulled her out. We are taking you to the Igwe's palace. He has asked to see you. She noticed they were the same boys that took her to the village square, but this time they didn't have the omu leaves on their lips, and they seemed nicer to her. When they arrived at the palace, the boys took her inside to meet the Igwe. Here she is, Igwe, one of the boys said. When the Igwe and the elders set eyes on Chioma, they seemed surprised. They looked at one another, quietly muttering words Chioma couldn't hear. Chioma, the Igwe said, is this even possible? You have been in that pit for 12 days. How is it that you are looking well? Not even a scratch. The God I serve did not allow any harm to come to me, she said. Chioma, you speak so highly of this your God. Can he heal my son? My God is able to do all things, even to raise the dead, Chioma replied. Gine, some of the elders exclaimed. Is this your God that powerful? Another elder asked. Yes, he is, Chioma replied. She turned to the Igwe and said, What is wrong with your son? Chioma, the Igwe replied, Obidike fell sick after the Nkuku festival. We have tried everything. Amadioha isn't saying anything. Ezemo has tried everything he knows, but Obidike is not getting better. My only son cannot die, Chioma. Please, I and the entire village, we are sorry for everything you have been through. And I promise, if this God you speak so highly of can restore my son, I and the entire people of Amaisi will worship him too. Chioma asked to see Obidike. She was taken to a shade where Obidike was lying in layers of wrappers which had been placed on top of something that looked like a wooden carrier. Obidike was a very tall, handsome boy, but right now he looked everything short of handsome. His skin looked pale, and he had sores all over his body. His mother, the queen, sat a long way from where he was lying because of the smell coming from her son. She was weeping and begging Chioma to forgive them and restore her son. Chioma knelt beside Obidike and worshipped God. She prayed for forgiveness on behalf of the villagers. She asked God to manifest himself that Amaisi might see and know that he is the one true God. After she prayed, she requested for water. When the water was brought, Chioma prayed over the water. She asked some of the guards to help Obidike, so they lifted him up, placed the bowl of water to his lips, and he took a few sips. Chioma stood up. She turned to the Igwe and said, Obidike will be fine. When he asks for food, give him something to eat. The Igwe nodded in reply. The queen thanked her and offered her some food and clean clothes. Chioma accepted. After she ate, she returned to her father's compound. 3 days later, one of the palace guards came to deliver a message. The king has asked to see you. As they walked to the palace, the villagers smiled and greeted her. They seemed nicer to her. The king looked pleased to see her. Igwe, Chioma said. My daughter, he replied. Your God has shown that indeed he is the one true God. Obidike is well again. My son Obidike is back on his feet. Your God was able to do what Amadioha could not do. Obidike walked into the palace. Chioma was glad to see him. He thanked her and said he wanted to give his life to Christ. The Igwe, the queen, and elders all agreed to give their lives to Christ. The Igwe declared that Amadioha had failed them. Therefore, the people of Amaisi do not belong to him anymore. Chioma was glad. She asked the king to send messengers to request the presence of Preacher Ndubisi from Isiala village. As many as gave their lives to Christ were baptized. A brand new fellowship with God began in Amaisi. A week later, the decaying corpse of Ezemo was found in his shrine. The shrine was burnt along with the corpse. No longer will Amaisi be held captive under the management of idols.